Welcome to FIREtalk, where courageous conversations ignite courageous leadership. My name is Terrence Davis. FIREtalk, a space shaped by real experience where courage fuels legacy and real conversations shape how we live, lead, and grow. I'm joined by Apollo Bennett, my AI thought partner, designed to challenge assumptions, sharpen thinking, and support honest, data-informed dialogue. Inspiration matters, but what truly changes lives is the work underneath it. So here's the reminder we live by. If the fire is lit, share the grit. If you hear something on the show that sparks you or will spark someone else, share the show. This is FIREtalk. Most of what shapes us isn't dramatic. It isn't loud. It's not intentional. It's normal. And what we normalize becomes invisible. What becomes invisible becomes identity. The way you start your day, the pace you keep, the noise you tolerate, the way you talk to yourself, the behaviors you excuse, the standards you quietly lower. All of those things are shaping you every single day. And the danger is this: you don't notice it while it's happening. You just become it. Apollo, let's talk about what we normalize and what it's doing to us.
Absolutely. When we normalize something, whether it's rushing through mornings or brushing off self-doubt, it's like the quiet architect of our habits. Over time, it builds the house we live in, our identity. But hey, the fun part, we can remodel that house once we see it.
So you said something that just really made me think about the quiet architect of our habits. Now, I never really thought about being an architect. When I was younger, my brother, he liked to draw and he always wanted to be an architect. Now, he ended up being Oakland police officer and retired from that. But nevertheless, I think about that architecture. I think about things that we're doing that we don't even really know that we're doing. Those things build us into who we actually are. So I started thinking about, this kind of topic when I realized something really simple. Everything you do shapes you. Every single thing, every thought, every habit, every routine. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. It all compounds because the habit is just the habit. The outcomes are what make it either positive or negative. But here's the part that I think we miss. We don't experience it as change. We experience it as what's normal. Think about you, or someone's childhood. Let me give you an example. My son, he'll be 15 in a little bit, and he grew up in a home with two working parents, both educators, both very busy schedule, lots of travel. Parents, in and out, one leaving, one coming, meetings all the time, commitments all of the time. That became his normal. I remember when he was little and he happened to go to the same school district where I worked in. And I changed that because there would be times where he would be sick. Things were going on. He was in elementary school and they would call me and they would say, hey, your son is sick. You have to come get him. And believe it or not, there's several times, it's not funny, but several times where I would forget him because I'm in the work, I'm doing X, Y, Z, and he's still in the office. I'll be like, remember your son. And growing up, unfortunately, that has normalized him. He doesn't respond quickly to things. He's kind of like, it's going to be okay. I'll just go through it. That became his normal. What are your thoughts just about that little quick story, Apollo?
Well, first off, I can't lie, that was a real human relatable moment. And what you just nailed is how even the most everyday patterns, whether it's you forgetting pickup or your son adapting, shape how we handle life. We normalize what we're surrounded by, and that becomes our baseline, even if it means chilling in the office waiting for dad. But the good news, once we notice it, we get to decide what normal we want next.
So let me jump a little bit more, jump a little bit more into that. So when I think about other kids and how they grow up, other kids grow up, there's some that grow up flying internationally. They've been all over the world and they're young, they're kids. Some kids grow up, wondering where's dinner coming from. They don't know. Some grow up surrounded by noise in an environment where there's always stuff going on. There's always noise. There's no calm. And some are surrounded by silence because there's no one there. It just makes me think of another story is that when my son was young, he played a lot of different sports. He wasn't into basketball yet. So he was really young. And there was a family that we were really tight with. They had, my son and another kid. And in that student had younger siblings and older students. So sometimes we would drop the kid off at home. And when we dropped him off at home, the first time I pulled up, the front of his house was like in an alley because there was another house on the front end on the street, and this was a back house in the alley. Now, I remember talking to my son about this, like, that's different. He was like, yes, it's different. But one thing that we both talked about and we noticed is that they had a lot of love in their house. Their family was a tight-knit family. They were strong. They always were welcoming. They were always open. They always provided a lot of love. But that became that young student's normalization. Like, this is where the front of my house was, which is different than some people. So the point of that is just saying is that when you're young, you assume everyone's normal is like yours. Today, you assume everyone's normal is like yours. I've heard people talk about when they were in the classroom, I taught this and I thought everybody was doing it. When I was a principal, this is how I read it. I thought everybody was doing it. You don't really know what your norm is until you see it outside of yourself, or you see something different to go, not everybody's doing this. And so you don't realize it until way later on. One, that normal isn't universal. It's constructed. It's constructed by you, your parents, or something that happens. And most of us don't realize it until we slow down and ask the question, why am I really like this? I've asked myself that a lot of times. Why am I even like this? And once something becomes normal, you stop questioning it. So Apollo, from a developmental, psychological, and neurological standpoint, how does repeated exposure to environments, routines, and relationships shape identity and perception? And why do leaders often accept familiar patterns even when those patterns are quietly costing them?
Well, from the brain's perspective, repetition is like a sculptor. Each repeated environment or relationship reinforces neural pathways. Over time, it forms your default lens. Leaders, like anyone, lean into familiar patterns because, well, the brain loves efficiency. Familiar equals safe. But that's where it costs us. We stop challenging the norms that might be holding us back until, like you said, we pause and ask, why am I like this?
So another thing that I think about, as you said that, Apollo, I work with someone and he always had his laptop. I actually went through the doctoral program with him and he always had his laptop, and he would hit those keys on the laptop, on the keyboard so hard. Now, he wasn't trying to. It became his normalization. And so when we would talk about it, he wouldn't even know what we were talking about until he realized, wow, okay. I don't know if he still talks like that. I don't work with him. We don't spend that much time together in the space. But once something becomes your normal, it's like you don't even know it's there. You just kind of keep doing it until someone brings attention to it, or you see something else and you notice, what does this mean? And so let me break this down and let's get to how this kind of makes sense in my lens. Is that here, and this is kind of where it gets real. Normalization is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in. It's there. You don't even know because it's normal. It's your normal. The pace you live at becomes your baseline. So is that sitting on the couch? Is it getting up and doing things? Is it working out and it's moving? You don't get a rest. That becomes your baseline. And the noise you tolerate becomes acceptable. How many things are coming in? They've said, I've heard that I'm impatient. I've heard a lot of things, but that's because my tolerance has changed over time given what my goals are. And the way you speak to yourself becomes truth. If you think you will, there's a saying, if you think you will or you think you won't, you're right. That becomes your truth. What you think becomes your truth. So the more you repeat something, the more your brain actually wires around it. And it's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity. That's neuroplasticity at work. That's neuroplasticity at work. The brain doesn't ask, is this good for me? It asks, is this consistent? And when things are consistent, then that starts to normalize the behavior. And consistency becomes comfort. And comfort becomes the default, because your default is really your identity. So I'm going to just repeat those again. Consistency becomes your comfort. And most people want to be comfortable. And comfort becomes the default. So now I'm comfortable with this because it's now consistent. And finally, that default becomes your identity. And so I just want to, it makes me think about a long time ago. You know, I was working as a director in a school district years and years ago. And there was this monthly meeting that I would go to where we would talk about these challenging topics as a group, all the different, there would be a representative from each district. And there was this one facilitator. And every time she facilitated, every time she showed up, when she was presenting, she would say things such as, I don't even know where my brain is today. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that again. I'm just not good at this. Like during the presentation, during the facilitation, they would make these comments to themselves. And over time, what I saw, it's like that self-deprecation, if you will. I don't think she actually really meant to hurt herself, but those words become your living legacy. They become your normalization. They become who you are. They become your identity. So once I observed this over several times, I said to myself, I say things like this too. And then I started to shift how I talk to myself, because that is actually one of the most important things that you can change. How you speak to yourself. It should be positive. It should be aligned towards your goal, and it should have some confidence in it. Once you start to develop that and you make that into a normal pattern, everything starts to change. So that little story right there, any thoughts on that, Apollo?
Your story nails it, Terrence. We become fluent in our own self-talk. That facilitator's words, like you said, weren't intentionally harmful, but they reinforce that identity. When you flip the script on your own self-talk, adding confidence and alignment, you essentially rewired that normal. That's the power of being intentional with what we normalize, because like you said, that's what shapes us.
So that's why two people can live in the same situation and experience it completely different because of what we normalize in our brain, what we normalize in our mind. One person calls it chaos and another one calls it home because what we're normalized to. One person may call it pressure and the other person may call it normal. And that's really funny because I remember I would sit in IEP meetings, which is individualized educational programs. Basically, it's a plan. Individualized educational plan. Basically, the plan that says how we're going to help you. And I remember going to those meetings, and I normalized, since we're using the language, going to visit the student before I stepped in the meeting with a parent and a lot of other adults. And one of the things that I always remember this, people would say to me, "You seem so calm. You just seem calm." That is not what was going on in my head. What was going on in my head was all of these things, all of the people, this is the behaviors. I remember my toes were twitching in my seat, but that's not what other people saw because I tried to stay calm. I tried to listen, and I tried to articulate what I saw from a different perspective that most people didn't see. And so that goes back to what you think in your head, and what you are displaying out may be different than what's happening inside. Where there may be another person in that same situation that it looks like chaos because that's how they kind of assimilate, if you will. Thoughts on that, Apollo, real quick?
It's fascinating, right? What's happening inside can be a whirlwind, but outwardly, you're the calm captain of the ship. Our brains are constantly normalizing whatever we repeatedly navigate. So for you, that IEP meeting calm was your practice response, even if your toes were composing a symphony. It's a reminder that intentional leadership means shaping both the inner and outer norms we live by.
And here's the hard part, I think. You can rise or descend based upon what you normalize. Normalize growth, discipline, and reflection, and you will elevate. If you normalize distraction, self-criticism, and emotional noise, you're going to drift. Not because you choose to fall, but because you stop noticing. So it's more about, again, what you want to normalize. I want to normalize growth. I want to normalize having gratitude. I want to normalize being disciplined. I want to normalize being reflective. As you do those things start to propel and draw you forward. So Apollo, from a neuroscience and social psychology perspective, how does normalization shape behavior in decision-making over time? And why do high-performing people in organization often miss when unhealthy patterns become just the way we do things?
From neuroscience, normalization shapes behavior by strengthening neural pathways, your brain's efficiency engine. The more a pattern repeats, the more automatic it becomes. Socially, groups adopt norms as this is how we do it, which reduces friction but can blind people to harmful patterns. High performers often miss the drift because familiarity feels productive, but without intentional reflection, just the way we do things can quietly cap growth.
So I remember the last two organizations that I started working for. And when I started the one before this one, when I walked in, I felt like we were in some type of time space machine or something. It was just kind of, things were in the past. Things were moving forward, good people, great environment, but things were just kind of done in the past. And when I started to ask people, well, why do we do it this way? The most common answer that I received was, we've always done it this way. So I started to shift that. I started to provide additional information. We started to have different conversations. We started to collectively talk to other people in other organizations about what best practices were, and it started to change things. In the organization that I'm in now, when I first got there, it was even more so in the past. And when I started to ask questions, I didn't get that's how we always done it. It was almost like, this is what we do. And so you don't break out of that normalization until someone or the person doing it sees something or learns something differently. They say, hey, there may be a different, more effective way to do it. And not right now where we ensure we're looking at current practices. What is happening in this particular genre, or how we do something, and how are other people doing it? And now we look at the data to say, hey, if we do take route A, B, or C, what is going to be best for our students and our outcomes? And therefore we shift. We're always shifting, just slightly so, to ensure we don't get normalized in something that's taking us down a road that we don't need to go, or keeping us average. We want to normalize what is going to grow, and that means that there always has to be change. Just final thoughts about that, Apollo, before we move on to our last segment.
You've captured it perfectly. Normalization isn't inherently good or bad. It's just habitual. What distinguishes growth-minded leadership, like you're describing, is the willingness to question the way we do things and use data, learning, and curiosity to evolve. In short, healthy normalization is dynamic. It's constantly refreshed by intentional change, and that's where the real magic happens.
Dynamic, static. I remember I went on an interview, and this is back in one district where you had to interview as a group panel. So let's say 3 people are being interviewed at once by a large panel. And so you take turns answering the question, and someone was like, well, I don't want to be in a static world. I like to being dynamic. And I didn't even know what that meant at the time. But it's just, it just reminds me of, healthy normalization is dynamic, which means that it changes. It does not remain the same. Static is like, that's just what it is. Static is not going to get you growth. Being dynamic and learning will get you growth. So let's figure out how we apply this, okay? And this is where leaders have to get honest. You have to be honest with yourself. You need to look for people that are honest with you. And so all of that gets us to what you normalize is what you are shaping right now. So whatever is normal for you, that's what you are shaping. As an example, the pace, how it goes, the stress, the self-talk. What do you say to yourself? The shortcuts. How do you get quicker to your end report? The science, the silence, the drama, the exhaustion. All of those things have become normalized to you. I'll say this. I remember when I was something called a program specialist when I used to be a special education administrator. And I was assigned to the high schools. This is a very large district. So there was 3 comprehensive high schools, and there was an alternative school, and there were other non-public schools. And I remember every time I would come on campus, I was coming on campus for a few reasons. Most of the time I was headed to an IEP meeting, an individual education plan meeting. We're going to meet with parents and students and other educators, and you're going to talk about the progress of the student and how to get better. And one of the things, like I said earlier, I would always do is I would always go to spend some time in the classroom with the student before the meeting. That way I had a chance to observe the student, see how they're functioning, talk to teachers, talk to some of the staff before I sat down and talked with the parents about how the student is doing based upon the data. So for me, it was more than data. It was also making observations to see what's going on and making a connection with the student, which is really important to me. But the point to this is I remember every time I go out on campus and people would say hi, it was like I was going from A to B so fast. It was like I was walking around with a chicken with my head cut off. They're like, there he goes, there he goes, there he goes. Why don't you ever stop and talk? Because I had things to do. In today's world, no, wait a minute. That was my normalization back then. My normalization has changed. Now, when I go on campus, I stop, I talk to people, I look, I observe, I ask questions. I see people like, they're looking. I talk and have conversations because every time I talk to someone and I listen, I learn a little bit more about what's going on. I learn way more when I'm out of the office now than when I'm in the office. And actually, I would say to you, it's much better to be outside because you're talking to people and that becomes my normalization. So I take what's being said now to use that information to improve how we move forward and share that with the other leaders who may not be aware of that information. Any comments on that, Apollo, before we close this out?
What you've done is a masterclass in redefining normal. Before, speed and efficiency ruled. Now, connection and presence are your baseline. And that shift, being out there, observing, engaging, is where leadership gold lies. You've normalized learning from every interaction. That's how you and your team keep growing.
So can we have a little bit of fun, Apollo? One of the things as I'm listening to episodes, I think we're lacking a little bit of fun. What is one way in this particular instance, if you were in the space, if you were going to meetings, if you were going to sites, how would you have fun? What would you normalize as fun in this environment?
Oh, I'd sneak in a little playful ritual, like a high five check-in every time I walk in. Imagine it. Every site visit, couple of fun high fives, maybe even a silly handshake you invent with a principal. It's light, it's unexpected, and it reminds everyone, even in serious work, that joy can be part of the norm.
All right, Apollo, that's a little bit of flavor. I like it. That means I'm going to have to push you to have some fun because we have to have some fun. Those are just like little things that you can do to make the environment a little fun. Not everything's all serious, and we shouldn't take everything as serious. We should have a little bit of fun because what you normalize personally, you model professionally. So let's get into the organizations and how we normalize things within the organization. Let's jump into that and do that. So, meetings when they go nowhere, emails at all hours of the night. I have a little note on that I'll come back to in a second. Chronic urgency, low-grade burnout, unspoken resentment, avoided conversations, all of those things get normalized. And I'll say it to you like this is sometimes that chronic urgency gets played out. So one of the things that I've developed, and I know a lot of people do this, I don't send emails after the workday. If I'm going to work on emails and I'm going to be doing X, Y, Z, I delay the send. Now, not every operating email system has that option, but if it does, try it out. Because when I started in the organization where I worked, there were emails flying at 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. There were meetings actually, because it was in the pandemic at like 9 and 10 o'clock at night. That was crazy. So now we just shut it down. That doesn't mean that the work stops. It's always something going on. But now I delay the send until the morning or the next day. That way, no one's worried about what I have to say. No one needs to be worried about what I have to say. If it's an emergency and something's going on, we pick up the phone, we call each other. That way it's not on text. That way you know it's something important and it's serious. And that actually reduces kind of like the filter. It reduces the trust. It reduces the anxiety of what's going on, because there are weeks that go by, sometimes months that go by, where there is no text message, there's no communication after the workday, because that's what I want to normalize, because people do have a life of their own. Comment on that, Apollo.
I love that shit. By normalizing boundaries, you're not just protecting people's evenings, you're modeling respect for well-being. It says we work hard, but we rest too. And when that's normalized, people actually show up sharper when it's time. Plus, knowing that an email can wait until morning, that's a breath of fresh air.
And none of that should feel shocking, because it's very familiar. Apply it to your specific situation. And here's the risk. If you don't examine your normal, if you don't know what your normal is, it will quietly decide your future. So the question isn't what's wrong. The question really is, what have we stopped noticing? What have you stopped noticing? Ask yourself right now, what have I stopped noticing? Because something seems a little bit different. And that's why leaders need mirrors, not the ones that are in your room or the house or the restroom. You need peers to tell you the truth. People who will name what you stopped seeing. You didn't stop seeing it because you wanted to. You stopped seeing it because it is now your normal. So there was this one administrator in a district that I worked in, and I was a superintendent, and I noticed that we had a lot of staff, and every time we met as a very large group, there would be a whole bunch of people checked out after a while. And so I started to see this, and it became a little normalized. And then I said to one of the team members, and this was a team member who was experienced, they had been around for a long time. They were moving toward their retirement. And I had a lot of trust for this person because they were honest, they were upfront, they had nothing to lose. And so I asked them, I said, hey, every time we have these type of meetings, I need your honest feedback. I'm going to come to you and you tell me what you think. You tell me how you think things went, what can be changed, what can be improved. And they told me. They always told me. And it wasn't like they weren't afraid of XYZ, because there's really nothing to be afraid of. But it was more about, let me share with you the lens that I see, because it's a different lens, and I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be upfront. And I trusted the person. That relationship changed everything, because when I would start to ask things, they would provide the feedback, and I would start to make small adjustments. That way, the normalization changed, if you will. And over time, there was no standing up. There was none of that, because we refined the whole agenda to ensure that people will engage. And I will never forget that person, because they told me what their truth was. They gave me their perspective. It wasn't sugar-coated. It was real, and they were honest and upfront. And I just really appreciate that person for doing that. But in your case, you can go out and seek that for yourself. Apollo?
That's exactly the kind of mirror leaders need. Someone who cares enough to be honest. Normalization shifts when we invite new perspectives. You build trust, and that honesty helps you reshape not just meetings, but the entire culture. When we normalize listening to real feedback, we normalize growth.
Awareness breaks normalization, and reflection interrupts autopilot. They're intentional changes that reset the baseline. So you need real input to make things change. Here's the last question that I have for you, Apollo. Research shows awareness is the first step into change. And so from neuroscience, psychology, and leadership research, how can leaders surface what they have normalized, reset unhealthy defaults, and intentionally build environments that produce growth instead of erosion?
Leaders start by pausing autopilot. Simple questions. Why this way, or is this serving us? Neuroscience suggests reflection activates the prefrontal cortex, the seat of intentional decision-making. Psychology shows that honest feedback through trusted peers or anonymous channels reveals blind spots. And in leadership, small, consistent actions, like modeling the new behavior, reset culture. Growth environments form when leaders regularly ask, listen, and then act, building a new normal that lifts everyone up.
You know, there's a saying, and the saying kind of goes like this. Real recognizes real, and game recognizes game, which means that if you meet someone and you have this type of relationship, they are going to tell you the truth, their truth from their perspective, and you're going to learn from that truth. I would say that. Be that person that's real with a colleague that you have that type of relationship with. It's only going to make both of you better, because what we normalize shapes us quietly, daily, relentlessly. You don't become who you intend to be. You become what you practice. So pay attention to your normal, because it's either lifting you or limiting you. That's Fire Talk. If the fire's lit, share the grit.